Big week for you. Short week, but big week.
Big week.
Big week. I bet I'm not the, Econ's not the only test you have, I'm guessing either.
No.
You guys have some time management things that you need to work through. So, I sent you out before class a practice exam that we hadn't talked about before. So, it is a bunch of practice questions that are of a short answer format that I strongly urge you to do prior to coming into class Wednesday. So, I will not assist you on the exam, but you're free to, or the practice exam, but you're free to work with others on it prior to coming to class, and you know, John Oxley is available like we discussed, so whatever resources you need, you can kind of, or you can use to try to work through those problems. Well, there's John.
Yeah, Tuesday at 7.
Tuesday at 7. Okay. At where?
What's open at that point?
Probably just about anywhere.
Actually, we could just use the library, couldn't we? Isn't there a whiteboard in the back of it or something like that?
Yeah.
Well, you can.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, you can grab a classroom too if it's better.
What do you think works for you guys? Classroom somewhere? I guess it's a good class. So let's see if Ward's open. If not, we'll move over to the library.
And you can always call.
Yeah, Ward Science 101 or something like that.
So let's say Ward Science 101. And then you can redirect people as needed if we need to pick a different room, but it should be available. All right, so John will do a review session. Tuesday, 7 o'clock. Be there or be square. All right, perfect. Thanks, John. Okay. So anyway, that should be waiting in your inbox, so make sure you make it a priority to check your inbox and make sure you got it okay. So anyway, you can check that out. Yes?
And is it just chapter 8?
No, it's everything up to this point.
Oh.
Okay? So it covers sections 1, 2, and 3 basically is where we're at on the syllabus, which is through the material we just did. So technically from a chapter standpoint, 1 and 2, but I almost wouldn't count 1. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. You've already taken the multiple choice problems, of course, on part of that. So these questions are kind of a mix of various things from there. But it's a pretty big head start on what you'll see Wednesday. So make sure you put your time into it. It won't go unrewarded. All right. I see all the excitement in your face, all the pumped up. All right. So I thought we would do some review today. And let me, first of all, open it up for just general questions. Give me a direction to head, and then we can kind of take it from there. Has anybody got questions that have just been burning from either the homework? I noticed some of you did not do that Chapter 8 homework. I intentionally left that one. I posted it a little after the other homework that was up there, so you can work on it after without penalty. But you're showing up as past due on the Chapter 8 homework. I think there was just 13 questions or something like that. So make sure you get in there and do that. All right, any questions?
Formulas over figuring tax, actual percentage formulas.
On figuring the burden of the tax, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start there. So the burden of tax. So one of the key things we uncovered that you may not have known before coming to this class, because people tend to say, let's just tax the corporation, or let's just tax the smokers, or let's just tax the alcohol drinkers, and it seems like a nice simple thing to just tag one particular group. But ultimately, unless we're at one of our extreme cases of perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic, as long as there's some slope to the supply or the demand curve, the burden of the tax is going to be shared between the two groups. And so I'm going to just kind of draw a somewhat flatter supply curve and a little bit steeper demand curve, not too big a deal. Let's just say that this is our starting place. So this is our home base, which you definitely should know for the test on Wednesday. I mean, even if you're totally stuck on a short answer problem, you can hopefully crank this out. So you've got our generic template of the free market, whatever good we're talking about. All right, so Becky, since this was your question, what good do you want to tax? Give me a good, any good.
Well, let's just go with beer.
With beer?
Beer.
Here. All right, so we've got price of beer running 18 bucks. Let's say in equilibrium. And now we're going to impose a tax. So a tax drives a wedge between the price consumers pay and the price Budweiser receives, the price that the producer receives. So one of our equations that we have that's kind of helpful for this is recognizing that the price the consumer pays no longer equals the price that the producer receives, which is what was going on here. The consumer paid 18 bucks, Budweiser got 18 bucks, right? They were one and the same. And now what's happening is that the price that the consumer pays is equal to the price the producer receives plus the tax, little t. Or, through a little bit of manipulation of the formula, we could also show that the producer is getting the consumer price minus the tax. Just kind of fussing around with the equation a little bit to get these different insights, hopefully, on that tax wedge. All right, since this was your question, let me ask you, you want me to do the tax wedge style or the shifting up of the supply curve style?
Shifting up of the supply.
Okay, so that story we can kind of think of as the beer producer was selling 200 cases of beer a week at a price of $18. And now the government's socking them with a tax, and so they're like, oh, well, no big deal. I'll just pass that $4 tax on to the consumer. So at $200, I used to offer, or I'm sorry, at $18, I used to offer 200 units. Now if I offer 200 units, boy, I better be getting my $22, right? So I'm going to add $4 of a tax at every quantity I used to supply. I'd be willing to, at 100 units, I used to need to get this much, but now I need to get $4 more. Right? So that was the fake supply curve. The supply curve with the tax. The reason I use the word fake is that it does not represent the amount of money that the producer is getting. That's still down here. So the real supply curve remains. The fake supply curve is $4 higher than what it was before. And notice we're kind of following this equation, right? We're just tacking on that tax. The problem is that consumers are not going to continue to buy 200 at $22. And so they're going to buy less when the price goes up. In fact, at $22, they'd only want to buy this amount. But through the jockeying of prices and the kind of the competitive process between consumers and producers, we're going to have a new quantity after the tax where the fake supply curve and the real demand curve intersect, gives you the quantity after the tax. Now, for those of you who like the tax wedge part, that's all we're done here. Here's the vertical amount of the tax is this. Where it touches the demand curve tells you the price that the consumers pay, PC. Where it touches the real supply curve tells you the price that producers end up getting, PP. So this whole rectangular region was what?
Tax revenue.
Tax revenue. Okay, so that's one of our calculations, is that that red region here represents the tax revenue, and it's equal to the tax times the quantity after the tax. In this case, I've got $4, and if I just make up a number here and say we drop to 180 units, 4 times 180 would give me the total tax dollars collected by the government. The total tax dollars collected by the government. All right, questions up to that point? By the way, I haven't even addressed Becky's question at this point. So,
What does it say next to the red arrow pointing up? Is that 40%?
I kind of did that a little. I put $4 and then I said, well, that's equal to the tax. So let me just clean that up for your guys' notes. Just put the tax equals $4. Okay, any other questions? Clarifications? Yes?
When you're looking at the graph and you're moving it, when you go up $4, it goes straight up, or does it like follow the demand curve up $4?
Okay, good question. So the question is, when we're showing the tax, does it go up by $4 or does it kind of follow the demand curve somehow going that way? It shifts up vertically by $4 at every quantity. So there's no kind of drifting or anything. We're just going to take the supply curve and shift it up by the 4. Whoops. The supply curve and shift it up by the 4. So that's a vertical shift up at every quantity.
So where the original supply curve intersects with the y-axis.
Over here? Yes.
Yeah, was that originally the price they received?
No, this is just the, what we call, we didn't really talk about this, but called the choke price. At this price, producers aren't in the market.
Oh, that's the minimum that they'll...
Yeah, that's the minimum, that's kind of the reservation price.
Okay, gotcha.
That's the price, the minimum amount they need to even get into the marketplace.
So they were always...
So now, but I thought maybe what you're doing is, this vertical height of $4 would be, whatever this number is, I almost hesitate to throw in more numbers here, but if this was $12, then this would be 16, right? It's shifting up by $4. So it's a vertical shift up by $4. So that kind of went with Sawyer's question too. Okay, anything else? All right, so the tax revenue, anybody do this little calculation here? 4 times 180, 720? $720 worth of tax revenue collected. Now we get to the consumer burden question. Who's really paying the tax? The producers or the consumers? To analyze that, we need to compare it to the free market equilibrium where both parties were getting $18, either paying 18 or receiving 18. And now we look at the changes that were done from there. And so, with the way we drew it, which curve is more elastic? Demand or supply? Which one's more elastic? Demand or supply? Supply is more elastic relative to demand. So demand, on the flip side, is more inelastic. It starts to look like an I. It's steeper. And what we learned from the consumer burden was whoever's got the steeper curve, I think we put that little note in your notes somewhere, whoever's got the steeper curve is going to bear the greater burden of the tax. And we kind of see that here. First, graphically, let's check it out. Notice that they're paying 18, and so this chunk is higher than this little chunk, right? So this price, if this went up to, and again, now I'm just kind of making up numbers, but let's say this is $21.50, then this part of the tax revenue is essentially paid for by the consumers. Therefore, it's the consumer's burden of the tax. The lower chunk, since the tax has to be $4, this is now $17.50. The producers are only paying 50 cents of that tax, and this part of the tax represents that. Let's call it the squiggle part here. So the green squiggle represents the producer's burden of the tax, and the consumers are the upper part. So all we're doing is divvying up the tax revenue. So, my little multicolor deal here, we've got consumer burden. This equals consumer burden, which equals, if we were putting numbers to it, 2150 minus 18 times 180. That would be their share. And then the producer burden is my green squiggle with a couple of these guys through there too. That is the producer burden. And that would be equal to 50 cents times 180. And those two chunks should sum up to 720. Okay.
So you don't, with the consumer part, you take your current price minus the old price
Yep.
and multiply it for your,
And multiply it times QT.
by your quantity. But for the producer burden,
I did the same thing, I just didn't show my work.
Oh,
$18 minus $17.50 is 50 cents. Okay. Other questions on that one? It's probably a pretty good question to start off with. Now, other things you see about this problem that we've talked about, consumer surplus, producer surplus, deadweight loss, any issues like that that you want me to tackle? So, Eric?
How do we graph marginal social benefit and marginal social cost?
Great question. So, for now, until we get into future chapters, what we're assuming is that the producer's supply curve embodies all of society's costs. So the cost to Budweiser that they spend privately represents all of society's costs, the marginal social cost curve. The demand curve represents the benefit derived by the consumers of beer, the marginal benefit curve. And our baseline assumption is that the people who are consuming beer, the benefits that they get from it, represents all of society's benefits. And so the social benefit curve is the demand curve. The social cost curve is the private supplier's supply curve as well. And so society's optimal point is right where it was in the free market equilibrium. Which also kind of leads us to the deadweight loss question. That's why this area represents a deadweight loss, because the quantity that would be allocatively efficient for society is still 200, and the tax caused us to be off of that quantity. That story will change later down the road, but I don't want to even come close to muddying that now. But that's what we learned in, that was like chapter 2, 3 stuff, kind of with the benefit cost stuff.
So can you be allocatively efficient if your benefit exceeds your cost?
No.
It's just when
Not if the, not for society. So the benefit of the last unit purchase, remember this is a marginal thing here, so the 200th beer, the benefit of it was equal to the cost of it, and so we know that it was an efficient stopping point.
Gotcha.
So
Yes?
how would we find like the area for marginal social like benefit? Like if you had
Okay.
if you had a given like price, how would you know what the area was?
You would need to know some of that if you were actually calculating the area. So the social benefit of all 200 units would be the area underneath this whole curve. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, kind of.
So that is the social benefit, would be kind of that weird area. And then if you knew this endpoint, then it's just back to geometry, right? If we knew this was 12, this is 0, then we could kind of do break it into a triangle and a rectangle and calculate the area. Is your question stemming from one of the like multiple choice questions, or?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Other things from this problem.
If your demand's perfectly elastic, then wouldn't the producer consume all of the tax burden?
Yes. So that's why we got this relative elasticity thing. So you asked if the demand was perfectly elastic, right? So kind of imagine as I'm going to rotate this through the initial equilibrium, we're kind of squishing out. This chunk is going down, 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 down. And if it went to that extreme case, our $4 tax wedge would be all absorbed by the producer. And the consumer's price would still be 18 bucks. Yeah, and that's one of the extreme cases. Same thing if we go, the other direction. So the tax elasticity, that's actually why I brought both clubs today. The amount of the blue area and the green squiggle area all can vary if we start to move these things around, and it's one relative to the other. If they're both pretty steep, they could still be equal, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're both pretty steep, maybe they're splitting it equally. So it's always one relative to the other is probably the multiple choice type question that you maybe have had. The elasticity of one relative to the other. Sorry?
Does tax create the biggest dead weight loss, or is that a price for the price ceiling?
Loaded question. It depends. So we showed how the tax and the price ceiling created the same amount of deadweight loss in the worksheet. So when we did your worksheet, which if you guys have those handy, I think I've got mine handy. The one I actually filled out. There it is. So if you guys look to your sheets, the deadweight loss with the tax of $2 was minus C minus G, and the price ceiling was also minus C minus G. So in that case, they were shown to be equal to each other. So it really depends on where it's set. So is the price ceiling, they can set to be equivalent, but that's actually kind of a weirdo case, by the way. That's just it happened to be that way. It really depends on what is the ceiling price and what is the floor price. Let me think for a sec. If the ceiling is always set such that it's equal to the price the consumer pays after the tax, you'll get that result, I think, every time. So if the ceiling price was set such that it equaled the price after the tax for the consumer, PC, then you'll get that result every time. I think. I'm kind of going out on a limb, but I'm pretty sure that's right. But that's a weirdo case, so that's not... but this is the time to get questions to kind of get a deeper understanding, hopefully. So bring them on. I guess one thing that is maybe something you should know is what was the significant difference then between the price ceiling versus the tax? As you look at that, what's missing from the ceiling that the tax situation has when we think about the whole economic picture, all of the economic pie, if you will? What's the difference between the price ceiling and the price?
No government revenue.
No government revenue, right? So with the ceiling, there's no government revenue. But who gets that revenue? Who's basically getting that benefit?
Consumers.
Consumers, yeah. So fundamentally, that's if we were to evaluate the ceiling versus the floor, like you were asking, that would be one difference, is that there's no government revenue, but it's actually the lucky people who get the apartment for cheap end up getting the benefit. All right. Other questions on this problem?
Can you have a dead weight loss if you have overproduction, or is it just with underproduction?
Can you have a dead weight loss if there's what?
Overproduction.
Overproduction, yes.
Yes.
That was from here too. So the dead weight loss with a subsidy was there's actually too much being produced relative to the allocatively efficient production point. So an overproduction creates a dead weight loss as well. It's kind of like this. It should be obvious, I think, if we kind of tell the story of, like, imagine that there's 200 units here. Is it a good idea to produce the 201st unit where the cost of that unit is greater than the benefit anybody gets from it? No, it's kind of stupid, right? So that's why we come back. It's just as important to think about overproduction as underproduction, that it's inefficient to produce that amount. Okay, good question. What else? Yes?
On this graph, there's, when we added $2, we went down to the price of 3, right?
When we added $2 for a tax?
Yeah, for either or, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
So we started at 4 and we went up only to 5.
Right. Because of the burden. The way those curves are equally sloped, right? The supply and demand curve were equally sloped, so we ended up cutting it in half. The consumer price went up by $1, and the producer price went down by $1. All right. Anything else on this one? Or let me open the floor for other concepts that you want me to review, or questions you had from anywhere. I have one question on there, but I wanted to kind of reiterate what I did before. For the exam, you should know how to do any one of these 6 cases. And I'll just tell you, I gave you one of these 6 cases on your practice exam, but for the exam, we spent a lot of time on this. I want you to know every single one of these cases. That's why we're spending a little bit of time here.
Could those be including the ones with government expenditure?
Possibly. Yeah, any of them. You want me to review that?
I was just making sure that
Okay.
included those.
Yep. It'll be one or the other. Or basically, each one of these columns we treated individually, right? Each column was treated independently. You should be able to kind of start. So you've got your blank sheet, or you can redraw a new one and do a little practice. If you want, I could probably email, if somebody emailed me, I'll give you the PDF of a blank sheet, so you can just print one off and practice if you want.
Can you go over connecting budget line and optimal quantities children again? I think
Say that again?
Budget line, connecting the budget line.
Okay, move into some budget line stuff? Sure. Probably a good idea. All right, so budget lines. All right, let's see here. So let's say income equals $1,000. You want me to kind of start just how it all works a little bit?
Well, it was the very last thing we went over in class that I think I'm kind of lacking on. It was like how we connected it to.
Oh, to the demand curve.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So suppose we got income of $1,000. The price of a burger is $5, and the price of a pizza is $10. So those variables end up creating enough information to make the budget constraint. What are all of the consumption possibilities given that you've got $1,000, price of beer, price of pizza? So we come into our two-dimensional space where let's measure the quantity of pizza on the horizontal axis, the quantity of burgers on the vertical axis. Usually the best thing to do is to try to seek out the endpoints. What if I blow all my money on beer? How many beers can I have? 500? 200? 200 beers, right? So $5 a piece. We got $1,000 now. We got a lot of money. So we can have 200 beers. And if I blow all my money on pizza, I can have how many pizzas? 100. All right, so what we learned is then we could be also anywhere in between. If I split up my money $500 to one and $500 to the other, I'd end up being right in the middle at some amount. Where I'm going to end up is dependent upon my preferences. So then we have that utility schedule with marginal utilities, and we went through the whole beer and pizza thing. So that deals with your gut feeling and your ability to rank preferences and all that jazz. Right here, we're really just talking about the money. And so what can I afford? I can afford to be anywhere I want along this budget line. And the budget line has a slope equal to the price ratio. So the price of what over the price of what? And remember, that one's tricky actually, so be careful. The price of what over the price of what? Price of pizza over the price of burgers. Now that seems wrong to me because rise over run tells me vertical axis is beer, horizontal is pizza, rise over run should be beer over pizza. So why isn't it beer and pizza? That's the thing that's the tricky part. So Corbin's actually right. For once. No.
Is it just simply because you're having to do an exchange instead of one that is more has to be a burden?
It has to do more with just the way we express prices. Since we're doing it on a per unit basis, it's the price of pizza over the price of beer. And what is the price of pizza? It's $10 for every pizza. And this is beer, which is $5 for every beer, which equals 2 what? $2 over pizza and beer over dollars. Dollars cancel. We got 2 beers for every pizza. There's your rise over run. Right? 2 beers for every pizza. So it just kind of flows through if you go through that process. Or, I don't know if Corbin did that all in your head or you just memorize it, that it's always the price of whatever you're measuring on the horizontal axis goes on top. So that's another thing. Whatever's on the horizontal axis is the thing that goes on top for the price. Okay, so what we spent a little time doing is that the market allows us to trade 2 beers for 1 pizza every time. You go to the market, you can always give up 2 beers and get a pizza. You can always make that trade-off according to the budget. All right, so the question was, what happens with the demand curve? So if we're measuring pizza down here, and now the price of pizza here, setting this up just like chapter 3 with the demand curve, once we learn what the optimal point was for this consumer, maybe the consumer was buying this amount. I'm just going to pick over the course of a year with $1,000, they're buying 463 hamburgers, pizzas. Wait a second, that's way too high. I had 1,000 on my head, right? It's, so they're buying 46. That looks a little more like 39, but let's just say 46. So what does that mean down here? At a price of pizza of $10, they're buying 46 of them. That sounds like a demand curve. So at a price of $10, that represents 1 point on the demand curve. And so, by the way, they might be here at 171 beers. So that was their optimal point, kind of in the utility maximization mode, translated down into the demand for pizza. If pizza gets cheaper, what happens to the budget line if pizza falls to $7 from 10?
Budget line
Goes
doesn't
out.
change. There's just a movement along after payment.
No. Budget line does change. So now pizza's $7 instead of 10. If I blew my wad on pizza, I could buy 100 of them. Can I buy more or less now?
You can buy more.
You can buy more. So 1,000 divided by 7 is, I don't know, somebody get out their calculator.
130.
So does this stay?
130, maybe close. Who's got a calculator? Who's quick draw? How much? 42. 42.1.
142.
142. All right, so here's 142. And so the budget line rotated out, and its slope now has changed. The budget line slope, following our convention here, is equal to now 7/5. We can sneak in a negative.
1.4.
1.4, okay. And so the budget line's rotated outward. With pizza being cheaper at $7, consumers likely to buy more, so maybe they come out to this point. Let's call it B. They were at A, and now they're buying whatever. 71 pizzas. 71 maps down here at a price of $7. Now we've got 2 points on the demand curve. And since we didn't take it this far before, but maybe we rotate out to $5 or something. We move to a point C. At $5, let's see, our endpoint's now 200, good. Move out to point C, maybe it happened to be right on top of 100, I don't know. At $5, and there's our demand curve. Yes?
Just for clarification, like, since the question was asked is what would constitute a movement along the budget line, that would be a change in preferences, right?
Good, yes, that's right. So you'd have to have a change of heart. Maybe you learned that beer or pizza leads to causes cancer or something. All of a sudden, whoa, better stay away from pizza, right? The FDA comes out with an announcement that pizza causes cancer. So then all of a sudden we changed our preferences. What would happen to the demand curve, incidentally? Pizza causes cancer. What would be, going back to chapter 3, flip back, it would shift to the left, right? So it would shift to the left, and it would probably be a movement along again as you say, if your preferences change, your budget's still the same. You could still afford 100 pizzas, but now you're like, screw pizza. I love pizza a little bit. I got to have at least one pizza, but I'm going to go from 46 to just one or two. So, yes, from a preference changing to the optimal point.
What was the blue line?
The blue line was another. I did price of $5.
Oh, okay, all right.
So that we had 3 prices that we were going. Okay. Good. What was the condition that must hold in the optimal point? So at these optimal, this is not really shown here, at the consumer optimum, i.e., which in this case would be QB star, burger star, and pizza star. What was the condition that held using utilities and quantities, or utilities and dollars rather?
Isn't it like marginal utility over price equals the other marginal utility over
So it's the bang for the buck for the two goods got to be equal.
Right.
Right. So the bang for the buck, the amount of satisfaction I get from a burger divided by each dollar I spend for a burger must be equal to the marginal utility of pizza divided by the price of pizza. So that was the condition that must hold in consumer equilibrium. Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Shifting gears a little bit, we had a couple questions on our homework of like finding producer and consumer surplus from a schedule of numbers rather than a graph.
Okay.
We could go over that.
Sure. So, question was consumer and producer surplus from a schedule of numbers rather than a graph. The two key ones that you need to look at are the endpoints. So what happens at 0? So let me start with the graph part. Because some of this just comes down to marrying up these two concepts. Supply, demand. Is it okay to just stick with free market, Rachel?
Mm-hmm.
So free market is here. There's the quantity. Let's just say it's 100 units, and this is $10. And so the pieces of the puzzle you need to calculate the consumer surplus are that quantity, this price, and then you need this one. So that's the key thing from the schedule of numbers. So on a demand schedule, we're going to have price at whatever, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 12. I just wanted to skip a little bit to get overview. Maybe I need to go further. And the quantity demanded. So at a price of 0, people want to buy a whole bunch. So maybe we'd have an endpoint number there of where they're maxed out at, I don't know, 1,000 units. Maybe I shouldn't have put a number here. Just so I can, as the price starts to climb, we back off. So maybe it's 900, 800, 700, 600. Skip down, and I don't know, maybe something's going on goofy down here. We jump to, I won't do a linear demand curve, 100, 90, 80, whatever. So we can eventually find where the quantity equals 0 at $18. So that's all we're really doing is trying to find out if we have a full demand schedule at a quantity of 0, what is that highest price? Is that enough for your question?
On the homework, it wasn't a free market, so the questions would give us a demand schedule, and then it would say now there's a tax. So
so they asked for changes, I bet.
Yeah, that one was.
Okay.
They did like subtraction.
Yeah,
like
they added like another column or something as well.
I'm not.
I don't know what that was.
So if we were taxing the amount by adding it to the price. So that's what they were probably doing, or if there was a shift is another way to do this. So there would be kind of a new column after the shift that would be at different points. And so, I don't know if this is going to address your question or not, but let me just take a stab here. If supply moves here, the new price is $8. And so you'd have to pick off from the schedule of numbers that there's the change in consumer surplus.
Yeah, I think
Is that what you were struggling with
I
a little
think
bit?
they were doing shifts because there would be like one question over like a shift in the supply, and then another one was saying they taxed now the buyers rather than the sellers.
Yeah,
And so you'd have to do it both directions.
so you'd have to map them, yeah. And usually what they'll do on those shifters, like if there's a tax of $1, all you're doing is moving the schedule. So if there's a tax of $1, then at 2 units they used to buy 800. So now with a tax in there of 3, then this would shift to 700 would be the new number, right? So then you do a new schedule of numbers that way.
I think I may have to just bring the specific
Yeah,
question to
yeah,
you.
that might be one to cover separately. Okay. All right, we just got a couple minutes left, so let me give you a quick little rundown of just a short bullet list of what I think you should really more or less come in memorized with. So, things to know, or things to find possibly in your notes. Demand shifters, supply shifters. I mean, if you have those two lists memorized, that'll pay dividends, not only for this test, but for the rest of the semester. So, price of related goods, income, normal goods, inferior goods, you know, that all that jazz for the demand shifters and supply shifters are good to know. For this exam, we've got the areas for welfare, which was consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss. Well, deadweight loss is kind of after the fact, but I was meant to say government rev, and then deadweight loss. Which means you got to know the geometry stuff. We work through that stuff a lot. So that helps with our welfare analysis. But knowing what these things mean, in terms of memorizing things to know, that would be good. And then the price controls, the ceiling, the floor, the tax, the subsidy. I'm basically just rehashing the things that are on our list. Those are the various types of government policy. With that last chapter we did total utility versus marginal utility. And that budget constraint. So budget line, let's just say changes in general. Budget line changes, which is changes to the price or changes to income. So that's it. All you have to know is 6 things.
No big deal. You got this.
Yep.
All right. Good luck. We'll see you on Wednesday.
They're also giving you multiple